Okay, so we're going to take a look at Pixlr, the online photo editing software that you can use to create, you know, digital collages or montages or just correct photos, improve them, right? Draw, paint, etc. And it's all just online and free, so you don't have to, subscribe to Adobe. Um, Again, you can sign up for an account with them, which might not be a bad idea. You don't have to, okay, they have a pay option, but you don't have to pay. So let's take a look at it and mess around and see what kind of trouble we can get into. Want to? All right, so here's Pixlr. It's just pixlr.com. Like I mentioned before, you can create an account. Once you do, you can like click on Pixlr E. In fact, if that's the last thing you use, usually your browser will take you right back to it. So here are like the projects that I've been working on in Pixlr. Pixlr X is kind of the simpler version without as many bells and whistles. Pixlr E is a little more sophisticated, and you're going to want those extra bells and whistles. So you want Pixlr E, right? I'm just going to start by creating a new project. I'm going to do that by opening an image. Over here on the left-hand side, right, there's a button where you can just click that, and it takes you to a computer where you can, like if you've created a folder and you put your photographs that you're going to use for your project in there, you just navigate to that. And I'm going to start with magicbag.jpg. If you've taken me for digital imaging, you're going to recognize this. This is just a scan of a plastic bag, right? I don't know if any of you still have a flatbed scanner, but you can put a plastic bag on a flatbed scanner and scan it, and it looks pretty cool. Or you can take a photograph of it. What I'm going to do is kind of talk you through some of the basic tools in Pixlr, especially layers and selections, right? Those are the two things that you really need to know to make artwork seriously in a program like this. I'm going to also have another lecture for you that will focus on masks and blending modes and things like that. So more to come. Over on the right-hand side, you're going to notice like there's a navigate area where you can kind of zoom in and out. I usually don't use that thing very much, but you can. In fact, if you don't use it very much, see there's a little minus sign over here on these menus. You can click that minus sign and close up that panel, or click it again to expand. See that? Here are my layers. Right now there's only one layer. It's a background layer. And here's the history of the things that I've done recently. So I can back up in the history panel and undo things or redo things there. I'm going to start by giving this layer a little bit of color. One of the things that working digitally allows you to do is modify color very quickly. You don't have to get a brush and paint out. You can just ask it to do it very nicely, and it will do it for you. Over here are the menus, right? Now don't get confused. At the very top of your screen are going to be your menus for your browser. This is in the browser window that I'm talking about, those menus. I can go, for example, and adjust this layer, right? I'm on the background layer, which by the way is locked. If you wanted to, you could unlock it. You notice there are little dots here on the left-hand side of each layer. If you click on that, you've got options like you can rename it, change the blending mode, adjust the transparency, or in this case, I can unlock that thing. So I can move it around now if I wanted to. If the thing is locked, right, its position is going to stay the same. So if I get, the move tool, it's not going to move on me. Right now, I've unlocked it, right? Locked or unlocked. I'm going to duplicate this layer after I change its color. First things first, I can go to the adjustment menu and choose hue saturation, right? Hue meaning color, and saturation is the purity of that color. So I can move the hue slider and adjust the color, right? There's a bit of a bluish tint to this thing right now that I could modify. A lot of it stays the same because it's black and white, but anything that's got a hint of color will change. Now I want to force color onto the entire image. The way you do that is by clicking on this colorize switch over here. See that? There's a little switch to colorize the entire thing. It forces color over the entire image. Now I can shift that hue. I want it to be a kind of a richer, deeper blue. I could lower the saturation or increase the saturation if I wanted to be brighter. And I can adjust the lightness. I don't recommend you adjust the lightness too much with this thing. There are better ways to adjust lightness, but just for the sake of brightening this thing up a little bit, I'm going to move it a little. And for instance, if I wanted to make this brighter or darker, I could again go to adjustments and choose something like curves or levels. Levels allows you to like shift the midtone slider left or right, to increase the darks or highlights. Move these sliders around to kind of modify the darks and lights, the values. So hue saturation or levels, all sorts of interesting stuff that you can find in the adjustments panel there, right? Adjustments. So mess around in there and see what you can figure out. And by the way, if you click off of the layer, it'll deactivate over here in the layers panel. So you may have to come back over to the layers panel and reactivate it to select it again. I'm going to duplicate this layer now. Check this out. If I go back to like those dots on the left-hand side of the layer there, right? The layer settings. I click on that. I can come down here. I've got options at the very bottom, like I can merge layers together, right? If I had more than one layer, I could. Or in this case, I can duplicate the layer or delete the layer. But I'm going to duplicate this one, right? So I've got an exact copy. There's two of them now over here. See them? So the one on top, I'm going to flip it, right? If you look up here, you've got options up here on this bar at the top. And one of them is to rotate left or right, right? See that? Or you can flip an image. Now what was on the left is now on the right. You can also flip it vertically as well. But I'm just going to flip it horizontally. Okay, check it out. Each layer has opacity, right? Or transparency. Like I can lower the transparency and see through the top layer to what's underneath it a bit. Or I can choose a blending mode, which is just a fancy way of dealing with transparency, right? There's certain algorithms that they write for these programs where you can change the opacity, the transparency of some of the pixels so you can see, through some of them, but not others. Right, so in this one, I'm going to choose the lighten blending mode. And what that does is it only allows the lighter pixels to remain visible and the darker pixels blend away, become transparent. So I'm left with this symmetrical composition because I flipped this thing, right? And I've got two layers here. I could leave them alone. And 9 times out of 10, you don't want to merge layers. You want the flexibility of being able to change them. But just for the sake of showing you how to do it, you can come down here and merge layers down or merge only the visible layers, right? In terms of like visibility, like there's a little checkbox next to each layer. You can toggle the visibility of that layer with that checkbox. Do you guys see that? You can hide it if you need to. You could merge only the visible layers or flatten the entire image, like every layer will go away and become a single layer. There's duplicate, like I mentioned before. So I'm just going to merge this one layer down with the one beneath it. Again, not something I normally do, but just to show you, you can merge layers down if you absolutely have to. I'm going to apply a filter to this single layer. Filters are kind of effects that you can apply to layers. One of them is going to be details, and you can smooth things or blur things or add noise or grain or sharpen things here. What I'm going to do is a zoom blur. And that makes it look like, okay, if you're running with the camera and you release the shutter while you're running, it's kind of zooming and blurring the thing. Even more interesting. It's pretty cool texture, right? I want you to be thinking about how can you invent textures on your own. You can draw them yourself, or you can get paint out and make splatters, or create a rubbing, or get a plastic bag and photograph that. One of the things I want you to do is to create textures. It's one of the best things that digital software can deal with is texture. It just handles it so well. Color is another one. It's real easy to manage color. That's our background. I'm going to add another layer. If you look over here at the bottom of the layers panel, there's a little plus sign. If you click on that, it'll ask you, okay, do you want to create a new empty layer, like a blank layer? Do you want to add text, a text layer, or bring another image into your layer structure? So I'm going to click image. Okay. This looks pretty cool, but I don't want that white background around it. But I do want to point out to you guys, if you know you're going to be using a photograph that you're taking in a digital imaging program, it's best to take that photograph against a neutral background. Now, Uncle Byron already cut this thing out and put it on a white background, so it's going to be real easy to select and modify. But let's start taking a look at using the selection tool. I've got a few selection options over here, and basically a selection, if I get this marquee selection, this rectangular selection, I can click and drag, select that area, and if I were to get my brush out, by the way, the shortcut for the brush is the B key on the keyboard, B for brush, I can paint here, and you'll notice it won't go outside of that selection, the little marquee marching ant selection. It's confining any edit that I make to the interior of that selection. I'm going to hit Command Z to undo that, and Command D to deselect. This white background here, I want to get rid of it. A couple ways I can do that. If I were to select it with, say, the lasso selection, I could try to go around this thing with this lasso selection, kind of draw the outline of it. It would take quite a while and it probably wouldn't be super accurate, but it could be done. But the next selection tool down is the wand select tool, which basically allows you to click on a particular color or value, and it selects all of the similar pixels that have similar colors or values, right? So with that wand tool, I can click on this white background and it selects all of the similar white pixels. Okay, and there are options up here on the bar at the top, like you can increase the tolerance to select more pixels, or use fewer, like a lower tolerance to select fewer pixels. There are other options, like contiguous is probably the most important, so it'll only select continuous pixels rather than pixels on the other side of the image. They'll all be connected this way. I've selected it and you can see the marching ants going around it. If I were to hit the delete key or the backspace key on the keyboard, it'll go away. And then I can hit Command D to deselect, or Control D on the PC. And I'm going to hit Command Z and undo that a couple of times, because there's another way you can do this. In Pixlr, it's a little different than in other programs. You can actually take that selection that you've made and come up here to the select menu. There's a whole menu of options for selections, and one of them is to convert that selection to a mask. Right now, in this case, it's going to select the wrong thing. Right? It selected the exact opposite of what I wanted. Check this out. If I go to the select menu and invert the selection, which is Control or Command I, now I've inverted the selection. I could then convert that to a mask, and it's hidden all the stuff outside. So you can make a selection and then convert that selection to a mask. You can also, however, check this out. a little further down here is the cutout or mask tool. I've got options up here at the top for what kind of mask. I can do a shape mask where it's like in the shape of a rectangle, right? Or I can do that magic mask, right? Like I mentioned, it's that same tool, but this time it's going to automatically mask it. So if I click on that white with the magic wand, it automatically hides that area. And so now I've got a mask on this layer hiding those pixels. Okay, I'm going to undo that, Command Z. I could also draw a mask with this brush, right? I can come over here and draw. But the thing is, if I want to, I could switch that. Right here, there's a mode I can remove from the mask or add to the mask. If I go back here, I can actually bring that back. So again, it looks like scissors, and it allows you to select things and hide them, mask them. There's also the lasso mask. If I were to, I forgot, I had to go back to the remove a mask instead of add. Right? Of course, I needed the opposite. I should have gone around the white area instead of that. Anyway, there's also a gradient mask where I can click and drag. It puts a gradient in that mask area. So it's a gradual fade. That could be really cool, really handy. Again, I'm going to undo all of these. The one that I need, the mask that I need to make is the magic mask. So I'm going to click on that guy, come over here, click on that white background, and it's gone. I'm going to hit the V key on the keyboard. The V key is the shortcut for the move tool, this selection tool over here. Okay, they call it the arrange tool. That allows me to move the contents of this layer around. It also gives me a bounding box where I can click on the corner and make it larger or smaller. And there's also the round one. This allows you to rotate. More about that later. I'm going to leave him straight and about the same size. But anyway, you can move things around with the arrange tool there. Okay, and a couple of quick steps here. I'm going to make this bug look beautiful. It's kind of ugly right now. You might argue that. You might think that cicadas are beautiful, but anyway, I'm going to go to the adjustment menu again, and this time I'm going to choose invert. I want to invert colors, right? White becomes black, black becomes white. Pretty cool. And now I'm going to change the blending mode of this layer. Remember, go to the layer settings, those three buttons on the side of the layer. Click on it, and again, I can change the blending mode. Again, I could change the transparency to see through it, or I can change the blending mode, which does that kind of, a more sophisticated way. So I'm going to choose screen. And again, screen is very similar to lighten, but slightly different. All right, pretty cool. Check this out. I'm going to make a couple of copies of this. Right? Remember, if you, again, go to the settings for that layer, you can choose to duplicate it. Again, I'm going to hit the V key to get the arrange tool and move my selection over a bit. By the way, if you hold the shift key down, it'll go in a perfectly straight line. I'm going to reduce the size a bit. Now I'm going to duplicate my smaller one that I just moved over here. This one I'm going to move to the other side. I'm going to rotate these a bit. Pretty cool, huh? You can bring new images in on new layers, cut them out, mask them, duplicate them, arrange them, all sorts of fun. Let's add another layer here, another image. And since horizontal, let me move this over here. And once I've got it in place, you may have to click off of it and then back on before you get the option to rotate. So I'm going to rotate this thing. Again, if you hold shift down, it rotates in increments. Like I mentioned before, like if you get the marquee selection, you can select rectangular area, just kind of rough things in if you need to. And check this out. You've got modes, like you can add to a selection or subtract from a selection. In fact, let me go back to rectangle here. Let's say that I select half of this thing. I decide, I need the other half. If you hold the shift key down, you'll notice up here that the mode switches to add to selection when you hold down shift. So you don't have to come up here every time and click on this thing. You can just hold the shift key down. Now I can add another rectangle to complete that selection of that object. Make sense? Now I can also subtract, like if I were to hold down the control key on my keyboard, I believe on a PC, it's probably the Windows key. You'll have to test that out to see, but now I can subtract from a selection. Right? So shift to add, and on a Mac, it's the control key, it's different from the control key on a PC. But anyway, if you're having trouble with the shortcut, just come up here and choose add to the selection or subtract from the selection. If I put on subtract, I could, switch to my elliptical selection. I'd say I want to remove all these circles from my selection. Right? I'm just clicking and dragging to remove those from the selection. If I wanted to mask this thing, click on the scissors icon over here in the toolbox. Use that magic mask wand there and click on the background. Get the idea? This wouldn't be as easy if these things weren't on a white background. So keep that in mind. If you can get photos, if you set your objects up and against a very uniform contrasting background, it'll be a lot easier to select them and cut them out later. I'm going to hit the V key on the keyboard again to get the range tool and rotate this guy again. Now, I mentioned earlier that you're able to modify color here. Just like before, I could go to the adjustment menu and change hue saturation or color balance or change the color of this thing. There's several tools for modifying color. And so if I wanted to change this from yellow to green, I could do that. By the way, like if I leave it yellow and red with this blue background, that's a triadic color scheme, right? Red, yellow, blue. Those are the primary colors. It's also a triadic color scheme. But if I were to modify this and push it towards green, blue and green, I'm starting to get to a analogous color scheme, right? All the colors that are right next to each other in the color wheel. So again, you've got options, especially hue saturation, for creating that image with the colors that you want. Okay, and remember, there's also that colorize option here. If you really want to force color onto it, you can do it there, right? Anyway, I'm going to cancel that for now. I'm going to leave it as a triadic color scheme now. Let's see, lower third. Once again, I'm going to duplicate that layer, bring it over here, come up here to my options on the top here and flip that horizontally. And let's make one more copy. I'm going to rotate it. Pretty cool, huh? And I can play around with blending modes. Maybe I'll do hard light for these. That'll allow me to keep some of the color. I would experiment with all these different blending modes and see which one gives you the results that you're after. Because there's all sorts of cool stuff, right? That's difference mode. But you should go through these and just check them out, see what each one of them can do for you. Anyway, hard light. That's a nice one. There are some of the fundamentals. Take some photographs of objects, people, places, and especially textures, and start messing around in Pixlr. See what kind of trouble you can get into. And between this lecture and some of the tutorials that are online, you should be able to figure things out. There's going to be some trial and error, right? And there's going to be some frustration, I know, but that means you're learning. It's a good thing. Start thinking about, what do you want to say through this collage that you're going to create? How can you add texture to it that'll add to the meaning of the piece? How can you use color in an effective way, symbolically impart information to your viewer, or emotion to your view, right? And ultimately have something to say. Look through the list of big ideas. Try to find objects that will help you tell your story, help you get that idea across to your viewer. I'm excited to see what you guys come up with.